Hello, and welcome to this Microbiology Bio 203 video lecture from Chapter 16 of your OpenStax book, Disease and Epidemiology. I'm Mr. Kennedy, and I'll be your guide as we explore this topic together briefly. Learning outcomes from Chapter 16 include being able to discuss concepts and types of epidemiology, compare and contrast types of disease transmission. We begin today with a simple definition of the term epidemiology. Epidemiology is the study of where and when diseases occur and their transmission. It is always related to populations. Etiology is the study of a cause of a disease. Morbidity and mortality. Morbidity is the state of being diseased, while mortality is death. Your morbidity rate is the number of people affected in relation to the total population in a given time period. Your mortality rate is the number of deaths from a disease in relation to the population in a given time. Incidence and prevalence. The incidence of disease is the fraction of a population that contracts a disease during a specific time period. Put another way, it is a measure of new cases and reflects the spread. Prevalence is the fraction of a population having a specific disease at a given time. It takes into consideration old and new cases and reflects length and severity of disease. Frequency of disease. Some diseases are classified as sporadic. These are diseases that occur occasionally in a population. Other diseases are classified as endemic. An endemic disease is constantly present in a population within a region. Epidemic diseases are diseases acquired by many hosts in a given area in a short time, while pandemic diseases are worldwide epidemics. This graph illustrates the incidence of disease as charted from approximately October through September of the years 2006 through 2009. This is a graphic illustration of the prevalence and distribution of influenza-like illness. The role of public health organizations. Probably one of the most well-known public health organizations is the CDC. CDC stands for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC collects and analyzes epidemiological information in the United States and publishes morbidity and mortality weekly reports. Case reporting includes healthcare workers who report specific diseases to local, state, and national offices. Nationally notifiable disease surveillance system includes physicians that are required to report the occurrence of notable diseases. The history of epidemiology with John Snow. John Snow is a British physician. He is most well known for mapping the occurrence of cholera in London, which was discovered in contaminated water. This early epidemiology study resulted in a public health response and identified a common source of spread. Florence Nightingale is also a person of interest in epidemiological studies. Florence Nightingale was a nurse during the Crimean War. Florence Nightingale collected data on causes of death and showed that most death was due to a lack of sanitization. Joseph Lister promoted good public health practices, which include things like hand washing with disinfectants, washing of utensils, and avoiding cross-contamination. There are a few different types of epidemiological studies that you should be familiar with. First, we have observational studies. In an observational study, data are collected but without manipulating patients. The data can be descriptive, analytical, it can be a retrospective study, or a prospective study. In a descriptive study, the collection and analysis of data through interviews, samples, and records is recorded. In an analytical study, the analysis of a disease to determine its probable cause, selected groups of individuals or cohorts are studied. In a retrospective study, we gather data from the past. In a prospective study, we monitor patients during the course of the study. Experimental studies. Experimental studies are laboratory or clinical studies where participants are manipulated through the use of drugs or exercise. These types of studies may be done on humans or animals. Many have ethical issues and are very complex. Reservoirs and carriers. A reservoir is a continuous source of infection. Reservoirs can be living or non-living. Non-living reservoirs can be found in places like soil or water, while a living reservoir could be a human or other animal such as bats, mice, or arachnids and insects like ticks. The definitive host is the preferred host of a parasite where they reach sexual maturity. Those definitive hosts can harbor a disease-causing organism that can be passed to other individuals. Carriers. Carriers are individuals who are capable of transmitting a pathogen without displaying symptoms. Carriers can be passive or active. A passive carrier can transmit but is not infected by the disease-causing organism, while an active carrier is infected but can be asymptomatic. Types of transmission: contact, vehicle, or vector. Contact transmission requires close association between infected and susceptible host. Through contact transmission, disease-causing organisms are spread by things like droplets from a cough or a sneeze. These airborne droplets can also land on surfaces or inanimate objects. Indirect transmission can be accomplished through the spread by fomites or inanimate objects. This is an example of several fomites. Vehicle transmission. Vehicle transmission is transmission by an inanimate reservoir, such as food, water, or the air. Contaminated water is an issue worldwide, as is dust and other aerosols. Vector transmission. Vector transmission involves arthropods, especially fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes. These organisms can, through mechanical or biological means, spread disease-causing organisms. Mechanical transmission can be accomplished through arthropods who carry pathogens on their feet, while biological transmission can be accomplished as the pathogen might reproduce in the vector and then be spread through a bite. This table will provide you with a list of some common arthropod vectors and select pathogens that they spread. Pause the video and review this list before moving on. Emerging infectious disease. Emerging infectious disease is any disease that is new to the human population, increasing in prevalence, and one which requires resources to control its impact. Re-emerging diseases increase again after a period of decline. often as a result of changing conditions. Prevention regimes do not normally work anymore against re-emerging diseases. These diseases may be drug-resistant, such as tuberculosis or malaria. This is a graph illustrating emerging and re-emerging diseases such as Ebola. And this brings us to an end of Chapter 16, Disease and Epidemiology.